Well, hi there, folks. Welcome to Miyagi Mornings, episode 120. I promised yesterday, or at least alluded yesterday, that we might talk about cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, all that good jazz yesterday, and we're going to. I'm going to make good on that. Again, not a promise, but a foreshadowing. So what I want to talk to you about today is the fact that I believe the Bitcoin dominoes are falling. This is a term that I've been using for a while. And when El Salvador crossed over the Rubicon and said, we are going to recognize Bitcoin as legal tender, I said at that point, this is about 15 days ago, I guess, that this is way bigger news than you think it is. Because you think of El Salvador, and probably the first things that come to your mind are quite negative. You think of like MS-13 gangs and all, and that is where they come from. And they're far more active in like Southern California right now than they are in places like El Salvador, where they come from. El Salvador, in many areas, is probably safer than many areas of the United States right now because their new president has done a big smackdown on this and is basically using his military as law enforcement and said, we're not going to tolerate this shit anymore. I want my nation to be safe for my people. And adopting Bitcoin is part of that because, as I've said before, El Salvador official currency is the United States dollar. I also mentioned Panama. I said, Costa Rica and Panama are looking at this, and Panama is going to do this. And this is also big news because the Panamanians use the U.S. dollar. On paper, they say they use the Balboa, but having lived in Panama for 2 years, I never saw a paper Balboa. And when I tried to find one, I found out they do exist. They look an awful lot like U.S. dollar bills. They're very old, and they come from the time of things like silver certificates. There's no modern printing of Panamanian money. If you go to Panama right now and you go anywhere and you buy or sell or trade anything, the only Balboas you'll see will be quarter Balboa coins. And so you have two nations using the dollar, and I said that Panama would go next. Well, in the 15 days since we first started talking about this, here's all the things that have happened in those 15 days. El Salvador is now trying to figure out how to start paying government salaries in Bitcoin. This was initially reported as they're going to, and then kind of their head bureaucrat in charge of doing that said, hey, whoa, this is beyond my purview. I can't just do this wholesale. But yeah, we want to do this, but we got other shit to take care of. But yeah, the intent is there. So that if you anything from a street sweeper to a senator, you would receive your salary in Bitcoin in El Salvador. That's going to happen. It's going to take longer than I think people realize. Okay, but it's going to happen. However, with this new law passed, I would point out there's nothing that prevents an El Salvadoran citizen who is employed by its government from immediately converting his dollars into Bitcoin with no tax consequences ever. So it's de facto there already. It's just a matter of an administrative process to do remittance to your employees directly in Bitcoin. And so that's going to happen. And again, it's de facto already there. Remember I said Panama will do this? Okay, this is in 15 days. Panama is going to send a Bitcoin bill to their Congress in July. Not is thinking about it, not might do it, is going to send the bill to their Congress in July. And I'm going to tell you, Spirko Damas Powers, it is going to pass. And I'm going to pause here for a second during this one and say, you're going to hear some things that I think is like, Jack, trusting governments now? I am not trusting governments. I am basing my prognostications on this, on the simple fact that people do what is in their best interest, and hence entities made up of humans do what is in the best interest of the humans that make up the entities. Self-interest. And I'm going to tell you that it is not in the self-interest of the people that run these small nations, nor the citizens they represent, to continue to let the U.S. government and the central banks of the world tell them how to run their economies. That it is in their own best interest, and as politicians who want to get reelected, it will be a very popular decision to go down the road that I'm going to talk about today, and it gets much bigger, much faster than you realize. So, not only is Panama going to do this in July, Paraguay is looking to adopt Bitcoin with a bill being drafted to make it happen. Paraguay. What? Paraguay? What? Where did this come from? It actually happened right about the time that El Salvador did it. And it's kind of been there, but Paraguay is just not a country people pay attention to. But remember what I said. Countries of this type, smaller countries with a history of being interfered with by U.S. policy within Central and South America would begin once one did it. Everybody's going to look at it, and a significant number are going to do it. And each time somebody else does it, it's like a multiplier. One does it, that creates two that do it, which will create four that do it, and so on down the line until you get to a point of real resistance. Some nation that is so beholden to the United States or other large national powers that do not wish for this to happen might be able to put the brakes on it. We'll talk about that in a second. One place where I think it's sort of kind of going to happen, at least initially. The bigger news to me, and literally no one is talking about this that I've heard yet, the CABEI, okay, which is a shorthand for the Central American Bank for Economic Integration, is made up of 15 member countries, and they have committed to help El Salvador with the implementation of Bitcoin as legal tender. What? Do you get that? This is a 15-nation alliance of their banking systems saying, you want to do this? We'll cooperate. Not necessarily they're going to do a lot to help. We'll cooperate. That's really what this statement is from this institution. We'll cooperate with it. We won't interfere. We won't cause any problems here. If you want to do this, that's okay. And maybe some of our members that are more friendly to the idea will actively help. And the rest of the members are just like, well, okay, you can do what you want. 15 members of something that means the Central American Bank for Economic Integration. What 15 countries would you think would be in? There's not 15 countries in Central America. So maybe some South American countries in there. Here's the member banks. National banks that are members of the CABEI. They are Guatemala, El Salvador, no surprises yet, Honduras, right? Nicaragua, Nicaragua. Expect that to happen pretty quick. Costa Rica, gee, where have we heard that before? These are all Central American countries, so that makes sense, right? Panama, Dominican Republic. Island out here in the Dominican Republic. Well, Belize, okay, Central America. Mexico. Didn't see that one coming, did you? Mexico is a major nation because they are so dependent upon U.S. interest at this point, etc. I don't think people realize the tremendous amount of wealth in Mexico. Mexico is not a poor country. It's a country with a lot of poor people. Well, much like the United States, but anyway. But, okay, we're still in this. This kind of all jives. Like, we got a Caribbean nation in there, but it's still kind of a... Taiwan. What? Argentina, right? Okay. Colombia. Well, okay. Spain. Cuba, Korea, as in the southern variety. Wait, what? Taiwan, Spain, Korea? What are they doing here? Why are they part of this? Well, even nations that we have really friendly relationships like South Korea and Taiwan still do what? They act in their own best self-interest. And they know that the United States, for not recently, but for decades, has been destroying the value of the dollar, that it acts as the world currency. And they know these developing nations have tremendous potential. And maybe they will, maybe they won't realize it, but it's there. So this is not a new thing, this alliance, this 15-nation alliance, but it's grown some recently. You got to start thinking about what you got here. What's the gross domestic product of all these 15 nations combined? What if these 15 nations all eventually decide this seems like a good idea one way or another? And maybe Taiwan is not going to so middle finger the U.S. government in its face that, hey, we're going to do this because they're kind of worried about that big, giant country with nuclear weapons to their north, China. But what if, like, the 15-member alliance just all says, you know what we should all do? Because this is more their banking system than the government itself, which there's an independence there. We should all put 5% of our reserves into Bitcoin. Just so if nothing else, maybe we use that to do business with each other. as part of this alliance that we freely formed in this free association. What if 10 of them do it? What does that do to the price of Bitcoin? There's not enough Bitcoin in circulation to do this without it causing at least a 10 to 15-fold increase in the price. You can do the math for yourself and figure it out. Domino falls, domino falls, domino falls. There's something else going on here. And I'm going to start hearing people that all of a sudden are going to become constitutional scholars when they hear this. There is the potential for states within the United States to do things very important. You hear the next word, like this, right? Like versus same as. Those are not, they're not the same. Like, akin to, ways to do this. And what people say, the states can't do anything with money other than use silver and gold, man. Well, first of all, they don't do that now. They use the federal dollar, which is not backed by silver or gold. You have to understand the purpose of the constitutional component that people cite with the silver and gold thing was the federal government was afraid that a state like, South Carolina could go out and create its own money and incur massive debts and then attempt to repay those debts with that money, which would then be defunct and then no longer valid, and then the federal government, the rest of the states, would be left having to bail out South Carolina. You know, since we stopped doing things the way that it was originally set up, we've been bailing cities and states and shit out like crazy. That's exactly why it was set up that way. It doesn't matter that it shouldn't be that way. You can scream and yell and shout and go la 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 and say it's unconstitutional. There's law and there's de facto law. A lot of how people are controlled in our country today, we won't go into today, but it is through de facto law. A lot of how the medical industry is controlled today, and you think it's government regulations, a lot of it is de facto law. It is not government. It is de facto private law. So you could have de facto private law, and you could have de facto government law. And what I mean by de facto government law is, we can all look at it and go, this is totally unconstitutional, but they have the means, the ability, and the will to enforce it, and they will do it. So when you say something's unconstitutional, I'm like, well, 90% of what affects your life every day, as far as your government is concerned, is also unconstitutional. So the fact that what I'm going to say could be unconstitutional doesn't mean it can't be done. I don't want to go deep into it today, but I've kind of looked at this, and there are loopholes, and I'm sure people smarter than me that want to exploit them at the state level will figure them out. Wyoming already has some incredible, basically giant middle finger to the Fed in-your-face laws, including things that are basically free zones within Wyoming. Like business conducted in here is not subject to capital gains tax at the federal level. That hasn't been tested highly yet, and it doesn't only apply to Bitcoin. So they have these zones, and they also have a blockchain, a crypto-friendly environment. That's one way that could be advanced. There are states within the United States that are starting to really be pissed off at the federal government. And the federal government seems to be doing everything it can to piss them off even further. It is highly likely that you may begin to see within states within the United States some sort of blockchain or Bitcoin consortium where they all come up with kind of a standardized way that they're going to be friendly to blockchain and Bitcoin and stand up to the states. There's also nothing that prevents the state of Texas or the state of Florida or the state of South Dakota or Wyoming from buying Bitcoin. What the Constitution limits is they can't force someone to take payment for debt from a currency that they create. That's a strict reading. They can do what they want, but they can't make somebody take it. But if that person is to have a violation of contract law, you have to have a complaint. If you and I have a contract and it says I must pay you dollars, and that's what the contract clearly says, and it comes settlement time for the contract. And I say, I have a proposal. I know by contract I am required to pay you in dollars. Will you take Ethereum? And you say, sure, I'll take Ethereum. Will you sign this that says you've been paid in Ethereum and that you're okay with it? This will be an amendment to the contract. Okay, you will. Okay, I pay you in Ethereum. We're done. We're finished. We have no problems. You got paid. I got whatever you tendered to me. We're happy. There's nothing that prevents that. What happens if a state the size of Texas, with 29 million people in it, an incredible tax base, in a booming economy, decides we're going to put, because Texas holds gold reserves. Texas holds reserves outside of the dollar. Texas can hold commodity reserves. Texas, within its retirement accounts for its employees, holds all sorts of assets. Follow me? What if they decide, you know what, not only do we want to be friendly to blockchain, but we just want to kind of signal how friendly we are, and we're just going to create some way that our employees in their retirement accounts can opt to have some portion of their retirement in Bitcoin. And Wyoming goes, we have a lot less people, but that is a pretty good idea. And like old man DeSantis out there in Florida goes, hey, don't leave the orange producing, state out of this. Like, hey, we got citrus and we got Bitcoin. I'm not so sure on this second part. But on the first part of these nations, oh, by the way, it's not just Central America and South America. It looks like we're going to have this start to catch fire in Africa. Again, I don't trust African governments. I trust individuals to do what's in their best interest. The two nations that are most close to doing something right now are Tonga and Tanzania. Very small nations with very little influence and very little control on how the rest of the world treats them. Monetary sovereignty is the first step in true sovereignty for a nation state. It is in their best interest to do this. Now, I honestly believe if one nation tries to do this all by itself, that somehow the United States government and the British government and the European governments will determine there's a real big giant terrorist threat in this nation you never heard of and find a reason to bomb the living shit out of it. But if you got Brazil, that's a little bit more complicated, isn't it? Right? I mean, Brazil's part of this consortium. And if you've got a couple African nations, like, there's a limit to what we can do in spreading ourselves out, especially since we seem addicted to remaining involved in the Middle Eastern shitholes that we continue to make worse. And if you start having friendly nations, see, this is where the friendly nations jump on board. Like, you might say, well, the U.S. has Taiwan over a barrel. Taiwan can't do this, because then the U.S. would turn to Taiwan and go, you're on your own. We can't afford to let Taiwan be on its own. We don't protect Taiwan because we care about Taiwan. We act in our own self-interest, and the people that run our government is in their self-interest to maintain significant control of the South China Sea, and we do that through our relationship with Taiwan. We need them more than they need us. I know it's like crazy because, well, China could just take over. Yes, and that would suck for Taiwan, but that's not why we care. That's not why we care. We care because it is an incredibly strategic place to have friendly relations with, both economically and geopolitically, and from a military standpoint. You feel me? So once there's enough going on, if you have South Korea is incredibly friendly to cryptocurrency. There's a lot of shit the U.S. government has told South Korea they need to be doing with cryptocurrency, and they're like, yeah, no, here. There's a lot of things they've done that I'm not exactly thrilled with, but overall, they have told the U.S. and our, financial controllers several times to go shove it up their ass. So this is what's going to happen. This is going to look incredibly slow motion as it's occurring. Incredibly slow motion. And then, all of a sudden, it's going to look like an avalanche overnight, as there's a significant portion of nations in the world, and then republics within nation states like the United States, and even maybe like cantons in Switzerland, etc., that do this independently in their own version based on the restrictions their government can place on them, or that they're willing to obey. Because again, if the Constitution says that it can't be done, does not mean it can't be done. How many things does the Constitution say your government can't do to you that your government does to you at will? So just because it says you can't do it, it always comes down to, can you enforce what you say, or are you willing to, or is the person or the entity standing up to you capable of holding off your force? And it will be almost overnight. And people go, how did this happen? Think of how the Soviet Union fell. There was all this shit going on, but anybody that said, hey, some real shit's about to go down. Because I remember when this happened, and there were people, the outliers coming on the news going the whole thing's about to fall apart. All these member republics are fixing to become independent nations. And people laughed at them. People scoffed at them. It'll never happen. And then, that fast. If you looked at the thumbnail of this video, if you're watching the video version, or if you see the graphic that went with the episode published on the website, there's a quote by Ernest Hemingway. Totally different, but the same, man. How did we go bankrupt? 2 ways. Slowly, and then all of the sudden. The world is about to change from an economic standpoint in ways that I don't have any idea what it's actually going to look like. I just know that it's coming, and I know that it's going to revolve around blockchain and specifically Bitcoin. Now, why Bitcoin? Because there's other ones that are faster, cheaper, whatever, they're better. No. Bitcoin is the one because it has first mover advantage and greatest underlying value. And because of the greatest underlying value, it has the most people actively engaged in mining and verifying transactions in the blockchain, which makes it the most secure network ever built. Didn't say a word about privacy, so don't go twerking off about that. It is the most secure place to store a digital asset with known parameters that humans have created ever in the history of humanity. And knocking it off now is akin to trying to knock off Google and Facebook and Twitter from the tech sector simultaneously. In fact, I would say that's easier and more likely than knocking off Bitcoin. And that's why these nations will use it. And then other assets will play a role, though 99% of them will go away and be worthless. There will be others that play a role in this, and speculation has its value. But in the end, it is the security of this network and the potential for these nations, as I talked about earlier, like geothermal in El Salvador, right? How about solar and wind in Saudi Arabia? Saudi Arabia could produce more solar and wind energy than any other region on the planet right now if they wanted to. You know why they don't do it? They have no use for it. What if they had a use for it? Oil becomes worth less and less over time. Oil is a draining commodity. I know some people think we'll never get off oil. It's going to be a long time, but it is like this. It is a constant downward. Well, oil's up. It's not up in relation to currencies of the world. Not much. It is right now, but it won't stay there. If you look at the 10-year moving average, it is a declining asset. It's all they have. What if there was a way that they could have something else? I mean, not a lot of research. You see how this works? Anyway, it's up to you guys to figure out what you want to do, but I'm just going to say, if you don't have something in the kitty here, you probably should. With that, we've wrapped up another week of Miyagi Mornings. I'll be back next week with more.